Holy crap, someone stole my house. Not a burglary, not a break-in. I mean a full-on hostile takeover while I was gone. New Lock strangers roasting marshmallows in my backyard, and the HOA president acting like a resort manager who just upgraded herself to my master bedroom. Yeah, that happened. I'd cut a business trip to Denver short and rolled into Pine Ridge on a bright Thursday, the kind of afternoon that makes you start tasting grilled steak before you even hit the driveway. And right away things felt wrong. Too many cars on a street that's normally so quiet. You can hear the lake breathe a thin ribbon of smoke drifting up from behind my cedar deck. And then the key that had opened that front door 1,000 times suddenly refusing to turn, like the house was shrugging me off. Voices carried from the backyard laughter, clinking bottles, the pop of lighter fluid catching, and I rounded the corner to see tents, camp chairs, a portable kitchen, and 8 people living their best lives on my property, like I was the uninvited guest. Center stage was Lydia Crane, the HOA president, mid-40s, perfect hair, and a way of smiling that made you feel like you'd already lost whatever argument she was about to start. Designer hiking boots, clipboard radio on her hip, the whole suburban field Marshall kit. "Oh, Caleb," she said, like I'd shown up an hour early to a party she was hosting. "We didn't expect you until next week." "Expect me? To my own house." I kept my cool barely, and said as evenly as I could, "What exactly is this, Lydia? Why can't my key work, and why are there strangers boiling chili on my grill?" She didn't blink. "Emergency housing provisions," she said, flipping a page for effect. "Board passed them unanimously. During community shortages, the HOA may utilize unoccupied properties for temporary needs. Perfectly legal paperwork's right here." She waved forms stamped and highlighted like a science fair project and told me they'd been managing my place for 2 weeks. When I said that was insane and she needed to get off my property, now she dialed 911 and reported me for trespassing. You ever watch cops try to referee a game when both teams swore they brought the ball? The older officer asked if I lived there. I said yes, and that my deed and mortgage statements were inside the house. Lydia thrust her documents forward like a magician's deck, and the younger officer muttered civil matter the way you say you're not paid enough for this. Without clear proof on hand, they couldn't force entry, so they left me standing in my own driveway while campfire smoke drifted over a place I couldn't enter. Lydia patted my arm like I was the one having a moment and said, "Sort it through proper channels. Maybe join us for s'mores tonight. You know what I mean?" It was gasoline on a bonfire. A motel room will humble you fast when your actual bed sits 20 yards away behind a locked door. I spent half the night reading HOA statutes, and none of it added up. No public notice, no emergency declaration, no due process. Next morning, I marched into the HOA office, a strip mall suite, wedged between a nail salon and a dry cleaner, and asked to see the meeting minutes where these magical provisions allegedly passed. The receptionist, a jumpy 20-something who couldn't decide if I was a threat or a spreadsheet, told me to make an appointment with Lydia. While she stalled me, she took a call, didn't realize I could hear, and said, "Yes, the Mason situation is moving to Phase 2. Are the new contracts ready? Phase 2. I walked out into the sun feeling like the sidewalk had tilted. If there's one thing every community has, it's a historian with time on his hands. Walt Dempsey, my across-the-street neighbor for 20 years, nearly choked on his peppermint when I told him what was happening. Emergency housing in Pine Ridge. "Half the lake houses are empty 9 months a year," he snorted, then added that Lydia had been asking around about my travel schedule weeks before I left my mortgage, whether I had family who'd contest title if, God forbid, something happened. Why is your HOA president casing your life like a private investigator unless she plans to profit? Let me back up a sec. That was the moment the line between petty HOA nonsense and criminal plot snapped. I called my friend Maya Chen, an attorney with a brain that could cut glass. She listened quiet enough to make me nervous. Then said, "This isn't a messy rule violation, Caleb. It's coordinated fraud. If she's forged process to establish control, she's not doing it for a campout. We divided tasks. Maya chased paper. I knocked on doors. Mrs. Cooper swore she'd seen Lydia measuring my yard with contractors while I was still in town 2 days before I left. Tom, 2 houses down, had watched Lydia pose with a man in a suit for photos of my place a week before I even told anyone about Denver. Then Maya called with a bomb. Preliminary development permits had been filed 3 months ago, listing Lydia's property company as owner, my address, my parcel number, my future bulldozed. She'd even secured a 6-figure construction loan with my house as collateral. That sick, sinking feeling when you realize someone's built a paper version of your life without you in it, I don't wish it on anyone. That night, an email with no subject line landed in my inbox. You can't beat her without concrete evidence. 5 minutes later, another, this one a photo of my signature on a property transfer. It was close, the loops, the slant, but the eyes were dotted with dots. I always make tiny circles, a dumb college habit I never shook. Whoever sent it knew my quirk. Anonymous ally, high access, scared. That's a twist, right? It wouldn't be the last. We met Detective Alvarez at the county sheriff's office. Maya laid out forged HOA provisions, fraudulent permits, the loan, the signature sample, and the pattern of targets: frequent travelers, out-of-state owners, anyone easy to steamroll. We'll look, Alvarez said, non-committal but interested. Proving intent takes time. Meanwhile, don't provoke her, which was adorable advice because Lydia was already escalating. Contractors appeared in my yard with blueprints for a townhouse cluster, my home reduced to gray boxes. One of them, a foreman named Tom Reyes, kept checking over his shoulder like his neck hurt. Later, he called from a burner phone. Your name is still on title, Mr. Mason. I don't start demos without clean ownership. She's pushing hard. Something smells. He agreed to meet and brought everything. Emails, projections, a timeline, receipts that reached back a year. Lydia had planned to establish control of asset, remove current occupant, mobilize phase 2, and convert to revenue before I ever booked Denver. Tom was ready to talk, but scared. She donates to judges' campaigns, knows folks on council, brother-in-law in the DA's office, he said. If I cross her and this fizzles, I'm finished. Fear, I realized, was Lydia's real product. She manufactured it, wholesaled it, and marked it up through every relationship she touched. I walked into her office anyway. She did that soft, concerned voice. Hotels are pricey. Caleb, have you found somewhere more comfortable? And I slid Tom's documents across her desk. For a heartbeat, her eyes flickered. Then she smirked. Anyone can print emails, she said, and called the sheriff right in front of me, reporting a threatening homeowner with fabricated evidence. I told her the truth would land, that Prison Orange wouldn't flatter her, and that's when the mask slipped. Accidents happen in protracted disputes, she said quietly. Fires burst pipes, mishaps with heavy equipment. Be a shame. She even name-checked Tom like a stray warning bullet. It wasn't bluster, it was a promise. That evening, Tom went dark, office closed, phones off, and for a few sick hours I thought we'd lost our witness until an anonymous message buzzed in. Check the community center cameras, Tuesday, 15 p.m. The next morning, a flash drive was taped under my car. On it, Lydia, in closed-door meetings with a permit officer and a man who looked very, very DA-adjacent, plus audio from her office. Accelerate the timeline, make sure the Mason problem disappears, and the worst phrase of all insurance unofficials, which didn't sound like Allstate. Maya listened and said, "This just went federal." Detective Alvarez called soon after. They tied Lydia to similar emergency housing grabs in 3 other neighborhoods, 12 properties over 4 years, millions in value. Tom had gone into protection with his family and agreed to testify. An emergency order put Lydia and her campers out within 24 hours. She tried to detonate one last stunt, declared my house condemned with a forged building inspector signature, and that alone might have sunk her if the actual inspector hadn't marched into court and said, "That's not mine." The judge found probable cause on fraud, forgery, conspiracy, theft. They cuffed Lydia, and she looked at me with a hatred so loud the room got quiet. "You have no idea what you started," she said. "You know what I did. I'd started telling the truth, and she'd built an empire on the absence of it. The day my key turned, again smooth and simple, I stood in my entryway like a man who'd clawed his way back through a storm. We scrubbed the smoke, boxed the trash, and I breathed in my home like a free diver breaking the surface. 6 months later, we tried the case. Maya walked the jury through timelines and signatures and money trails. Tom explained the development scheme. Other homeowners. The Carters, the Delgados, finally stood up and said, "Her to me too." Our anonymous helper, Lydia's own assistant, sick of enabling crimes, brave enough at last to step into the light. The jury didn't flinch. Guilty 15 counts. The network unraveled, shell companies frozen, co-conspirators charged, properties restored. People cried in my backyard. Grown men who'd thought they were crazy for years finally hearing a judge say, "You were right." We threw a little party to mark the end. Simple food, cheap beer, laughter that sounded like healing. And that's when the last twist came rolling up in a black sedan. Lydia, somehow out of custody, walked toward us in a county-issue jumpsuit like a ghost refusing to stay put. My heart stuttered. Maya dialed 911. Tom pulled his kids behind him. Lydia lifted a small device with a red button, smiling with that thin cruelty I'd memorized. "Sometimes you win the battle and lose the war," she said, and pressed it. I braced for the worst. Sirens surged, and only then did I get it. She'd triggered a tracker, calling the police to herself for one last performance, one last scare, one last try at living rent-free in our heads. They took her down on my lawn, Detective Alvarez leaning in to tell me she'd slipped custody for 6 hours, and of all the places in the world she'd come to mine. Obsession makes people dumb. Later, after the taillights vanished and the noise quieted, I stood at the edge of the deck where her emergency village had stood, staring at the water, catching moonlight in broken silver. Here's the thing I learned the hard way: bullies count on isolation more than fear. They need you alone, doubting yourself, too tired to push back. But when you document everything, when you find one ally, then 2, then 10, when you refuse to be shamed out of your own front door, even the slickest operation can't outrun sunlight. So tell me, where do you draw the line between a rule book and a shakedown, between community and control? If you walked up to find your locks changed and your life photocopied onto someone else's forms, do you swing for peace or plant your feet for war? I know what I chose, and I can sleep in my bed because of it. Drop your take. What was right, what was wrong, what you'd have done differently. And if you've got an HOA story that still keeps you up, lay it out. Maybe the rest of us can hand you a flashlight.